Ooh, good girl. Good girl. Give me a cuddle. Ooh. Now what are we doing in the workshop today, Now we're going to be making a little vase out of some steel, doing a bit of welding and explaining to people that it's not so hard. Give it a try anyway. Good girl, come. So I get asked quite often to show some techniques on welding, and I've always felt a little bit reluctant because I'm not fully trained qualified welder, but I can do a bit of welding just to get me out of trouble. And what I can do is just pass on a few tips whilst I'm doing this little video on this vase that I'm going to make. So I'll be using a MIG welder. You can also use a TIG welder and a stick welder. So arc welding is stick, TIG is tungsten inert gas, and MIG is... Anyway, you don't need to know all of those terms, but just some of the basic terms. So I'm not going to teach you from a professional point of view, but more how I go about doing my work. If you've been watching my videos for a while, you'll notice that I've used this yellow welder here. It's an Australian made WIA, Welding Industries Australia, Weldmatic 200i. It's my little MIG welder, but also can be used as a stick welder or an arc welder. So it's got those two capacities there. So with this welder you can use it with gas for shielding your weld pool, or you can use flux cord wire. With gas, use a solid wire. Flux cord has a resin in the wire which shields, when it burns, it shields the weld pool from oxidization, and without gas or the shielding from the flux cord, then the weld pool will just basically explode everywhere and become very porous and be terrible. Let's just pop the side of the case open here. It's where we store the wire. Let's have a real quick look at the settings chart here. What we'll notice is material thickness along the top up here, 8mm down to 0.8, and also the wire size 0.6, 0.8, 0.9mm, and so that corresponds to the wire that you have in your machine, and then your settings of your machine, which is important to a lot of you learning to weld. You'll have wire feed and volts. What we've got here is the handpiece, or the welding gun. On the very tip of that is where your wire comes out, your trigger. When you pull the trigger, wire will feed out and gas will flow through. This is a shield for your gas. If you're using flux cord wire, this isn't required. This is only to shield gas and direct the gas onto the work. So this machine I've used quite a lot in my videos. I find it invaluable. It's my horizontal bandsaw. It's not an expensive one. I think I paid about $550 for it, Australian. But the beauty about this saw here, it doesn't take up a lot of space. It's versatile because you can use it in the upwards position here, like a vertical bandsaw or a horizontal bandsaw. And I use it for both quite a lot. Also, it's a swivel head type, so you can leave the work stationary and this head swivels, giving you angles up to 45 degrees for cutting. It's a good machine. Trick is with this machine is to buy a quality blade. The better the blade, the longer it'll last, even without using lubricants. So this is the project we're going to be making. So a little while ago I saw a shape or a vase in a shop, and I thought that's quite nice. Why don't we try and make that? So I recreated it on Google SketchUp, and we'll be tracing it out using these tools here on some sheet metal steel, and then we'll go and cut it out from there. I'm about to cut this out, but just wanted to mention I'm going to be using the bandsaw. If you don't have a bandsaw, you can use an angle grinder with a cutting disc, or if you've got a plasma cutter, you can use that. If you've got a guillotine, you can use that. Not everybody's got all those tools, so use what you've got. If you want to expand and get better tools along the way, they just make the job more efficient. If you've got a CNC plasma cutter, use that. Anyway, use what you got. Just don't gnaw it off with your teeth. Next one I'll be cutting out with the angle grinder. Just a quick shout out to some good people, a small business, Smith & Arrow. I use their abrasives. They're only a small tiny business here, I like to support them. I use their abrasives on the linisher there, the sanding disc for the sander, and also for grinding. They've got a ton of stuff there, drill bits. Check them out, Smith & Arrow. I'll leave their website in the video details. Now the reason why I don't like to use grinders in my home workshop is because these things are darn noisy, and they're not good for the neighbours. Anyway, just for one-offs, every now and then, they're perfect. Cheap tool for cutting steel. Thought I'd better mention as well, for cutting steel, shaping steel, although these are very noisy, they are so versatile. They can get in and cut so many things. Heavy steel, thin steel, for grinding, shaping, very versatile tool and relatively cheap. So you will change these discs, you'll wear through them, they're a consumable, but they're only a couple of bucks each, or not even that, maybe 50 cents each or something. Anyway, let's keep cutting. You can notice there it's throwing quite a lot of sparks, so have a good fire extinguisher. Watch where the sparks are going. It's not going into a wood pile or a pile of dust or a bin or something like that. Keep the flammables away. Hot tip. Could be a hot tip. So next one I'll be using is a plasma cutter, but haven't got it turned on yet. If you're lucky enough to have a plasma cutter, they're a very efficient tool to use. Probably need a bit of a guide, but very efficient, and why not use it if you got it. By the way, if you're using a plasma cutter, you need an air compressor. We'll have a quick look at this plasma cut. You can see there, this stuff's called dross. It's kind of like a big dag hanging over the edge. All it takes really is just to knock it off with a, this is just a chipping hammer. Just falls off. So it travelled a bit faster that time. It's a lot cleaner cut. Got my 6 pieces. Now I can cut out the individual ones. Just be careful, sharp edges. Particularly when using those angle grinders, they leave some deadly sharp edges. I'll be using this this dirty printout as a guide here, and I'll mark that out now onto the steel. May have just broken a blade. She snapped. That's about a year old, this blade, so it was due to go. Always keep a spare blade. Lower wheels normally covered in filings. We can try that again now. Because these pieces are the master copies, I'll take these over to the Vase, grab the file, clean up the edges so I can copy them. Alright, now I can mark out the rest of them. In this instance I'm going to use a scriber just to get a nice crisp line on there. So I was thinking, you may not have a bandsaw, you may not have an angle grinder, you may not have a plasma cutter, you may not have a guillotine, but you may have a jigsaw. So I've got a metal cutting blade in that. The advice is to use a bit of cutting fluid, using the same portion of blade going through that steel. It gets pretty hot pretty quick. Cutting fluid to help keep the blade sharper for longer. So I have all the pieces cut out now. I'm going to get some vinegar, and this is just plain white vinegar. I've used it before, but there's no point throwing it out. It's just vinegar, and I'll put all those pieces inside here. So the vinegar just softens that mill scale, so when you want to grind, it off later, it just comes off so much easier.
And when I'm done with this, I'll just pour this vinegar back in the bottle and use it again next time.
Alright, that's been about an hour. Let's pull one out and have a look. Rinse it off in some water. I'm going to clean this mill scale off now. These are the ones that have been in vinegar. Here's like a sample of something that hasn't been treated in vinegar. That's the mill scale untouched. I'm going to use a strip disc. That's for stripping paint and scale. I think they're a polyurethane weave, but let's just see how that goes. So that little experiment shows that vinegar works really well. You can see this one here, the sample here with no treatment. The disc is just skidding off the top of that, it's just polishing it. These faces meet on the inside. I need to put a chamfer on that inside at that angle approximately where they should be joining face to face in pretty much a straight line. Otherwise what you get is kind of an expansion of the actual size it should be. Let's see if I can get that focused a bit better. So the bottom of the vase becomes about 2 millimeters bigger by each particular joint. So I need to fix that up, and that's what I'm going to be doing next. Let's get ready to do some welding. So inside the wire cover of most welding machines you'll have a settings chart here. I use this as a guide. So the gas I'm using here is argon plus 5% CO2 plus 2% oxygen. I'm using 0.8mm wire. So down through here. Okay, so 3mm steel. The settings should be wire feet of 7 and volts of 20. I like a flow rate of about 17 to 18 litres per minute. We can set that up on this gauge here. This other one's the pressure gauge. Probably similar to most machines, got these settings and controls up here. It said 7, so let's just wind this guy back to 7 and take this up to 20. Let's do a little bit of a test weld on some scrap and see how that looks. Good time to talk about some safety gear. I think it's fairly important if you're going to get into welding that you protect yourself from the dangers. One, electricity. Make sure you've got a good earth between your job and your handpiece. That's really important. You are dealing with voltages and electricity. Next thing is UV. So welding, you're throwing UV everywhere. It reflects off walls. You've got to protect yourself. I'm very fair skinned. I damage very, very quickly. When I say damage, I burn. Like sunburn, really bad sunburn. I see a lot of people welding without gloves. And the other thing is physical burn from a hot molten piece of ball coming off the weld. It flies off, it lands on your leg or your arm, it hurts. Alright, so let's get ready to do some of this welding. I'm going to put this gear on. I use a jacket because I've got one. If I didn't have a jacket like this leather welding jacket, I'd use a long sleeve and button up around the neck. Just before we get welding, talk about the helmet a little bit. This is a good quality helmet. People often say when they're learning to weld that they find it hard to see the weld itself. It comes down to sometimes the quality of your helmet, but also the adjustments on the helmet. So get used to adjusting your helmet to suit your needs, how much outside brightness, how dark it is inside. Make sure your lens is clean, and buy the best helmet you can afford. Alright, so the other thing too when you're welding is just to get your feet and your stance comfortable, using your hand as a guide. I think that's really important. A lot of people just freehand weld and you'll get a weld that sort of tracks all over the place, and it doesn't look so pretty. So wherever you possibly can, weld with a hand, with the other hand as a steady or something else to lean on. Well, that's my little test weld there, not too bad. I might just play around with the settings a little bit and see if I can make a little bit of a change that sounds a bit better. Looks okay. You be the judge. One last test. We'll probably run with that. That's my last weld. We'll run with that. And again, so if you can move faster or slower depending on what your settings are. I'm talking about your home welding here, not professional stuff here. now that that's pretty much all tacked up, I'll remove the tape, and I like to weld horizontally wherever I possibly can. Otherwise the weld sort of falls away, and that requires a whole new skill set to be able to do that. So we're not doing that on this video. Vertical ups and vertical downs and all that sort of stuff. So let's remove the tape and get set up for doing horizontal welding. Notice how I'm welding now. This is using gas, and I'm pushing the weld forward, and the gas is flooding the weld bead. That's pushing, that's pulling. So you can weld both ways. JD from Welding Tips and Tricks will certainly talk about that, and he's the man. Again, we're just welding at home here. So for my opinion here, this is the weld setting, the original weld settings, 7 and 20, wire speed 7 and voltage 20, as opposed to the skinny little bead down there where I changed it down to about 17.5, 18, something like that. So it wasn't hot enough. You just got to experiment. These are all going to be ground down anyway, so that's no big deal, but you can see there's some difference. The main thing is the tips to take away: nice steady rest for your travel, so it's not wobbly. Good protection for your hands, so you can get in nice and close. Being able to see your welds really important as well, and just taking your time and enjoying the process. Well, that was a really enjoyable project. It's all finished up now. Let that finish dry, and we'll think about putting a plant in it later, or maybe some pencils and some rulers and workshop stuff. But bit of sheet steel, bit of welding, bit of grinding, and a bit of imagination, you can get yourself a nice little project. Well, I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know what you thought in the comments. Give me a thumbs up if you think I deserved it. Hope to see you on the next one. You take care.